manager, how are things going relative to the Bill of Rights? Are there any issues that have arose in the last 10 years? And, this is a 10-year program, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are no set rules on the procedure.
Okay.
I would ask that you work through the chair who runs this meeting. You can certainly provide comments and questions on each section of the charter. Staff is here available should they need to answer any specific questions that may arise. But generally, we're sticking to the articles before us tonight. Your comments, your recommendations on potential changes to these provisions that are before you tonight. Anything else, Brian?
I do, Madam Attorney. So we've established a schedule with which articles will be reviewed on which day. Some of staff specialties will be specific to some of those articles. For example, today may involve some planning topics. So therefore, I've requested the town planner to be here to assist. And the goal is for, as staff, to be a resource to you as you go through this process. Now, the formality of it, I believe the way Madam Attorney explained it is the best for us. So if you wish to inquire on staff expertise or knowledge, just request it through us and we will call on staff.
Where you have consensus to change certain provisions or recommend changes to certain provisions at the end of each section. So that doesn't mean you can't go back later and say, you know what, maybe we should recommend another change to Article 1. But if you can just do it as you go for each meeting and
I think, Madam Attorney, you said it best there. Where it's modeled after the county's preamble.
the Citizens Bill of Rights, yes. The preamble is unique to Surfside as far as I'm concerned, but the Bill of Rights is what almost is verbatim from the county charter. You can look at the language in the preamble, and if you see any changes or recommendations, you can certainly identify those.
Right, just so we're all on the same page, our process here is to make a recommendation, which goes to the commission, which gets voted on to then go to the residents. So our actions here, while they're a recommendation and an advisory board, are not actually the final say on any of the items.
That's absolutely right.
Excellent. Okay, so
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Can we invite the town planner to join us at the table?
you're the town manager?
If there is a mutual understanding, and if you wish to do this, you guys, yeah, if you feel more comfortable up here, absolutely, why not?
Welcome to the table. So is there any questions?
Before you start, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Chair. Would you like to address, if you have any additional public comment cards, would you like to address that at this time?
Okay.
Or at the end?
Take it later, but I think we do
It's
have
just,
a
we already
card.
had one more. Okay, so let's, although it's late, we will allow it, as there's not too many people here tonight. It's going to be a 3-minute timer. This South Hour.
Where would you like me to stand?
Wherever you feel comfortable.
How's this? Okay. Hi, so first of all, my name is Eliana Salzauer. I live at 9317 Spade Drive. I want to, for the record, state that it's upsetting to many residents that we are meeting in commission chambers and this is not being recorded. People got a response that it's being recorded. What that is audio recording, a tape recorder that looks like it came out of a time machine for Back to the Future in 1980 something. So the residents are humbly requesting that these very important board meetings be streamed and be recorded and be put on the website so that they can see the process. Because at the end of this couple of month process, there are going to be some pretty, I'm guessing, bold revisions to the charter that residents are going to want to know, how was that sausage made? And you're making the sausage here. And residents are entitled to the transparency to know how that thought process, the discussion was had that led you to the conclusions of recommending these changes. What we've seen at the commission level sometimes is not a lot of discussion, items are brought forward and they're voted on right away. So residents are not going to get that vetting or that sausage making experience that they deserve with such important changes here. I also want to say for the record that I think there are people seated on this board who should be recusing themselves and have a conflict of interest. I think that there will be gift receipts, evidence and such that will back that up, but for now I'm asking that people take a deep look inside and decide whether or not they should be sitting at this table or there are compromises the validity of what you're doing here today, or whether it puts the workings of this commission, of this committee, of this board in a questionable light, because preserving the integrity of this process is important. I would ask, obviously, that the county's ethics and that the county's rules be respected. If the Ethics Commission has decided that the citizens have a Bill of Rights and that they're entitled to that Bill of Rights, it is not for anyone sitting at this table to tweak that without Mr. Arroyo sitting at this table, without inviting the Board of Ethics to come here and explain to you why they have those, in place. It is important. The ethics is the floor. You can do more. You can expect more of your elected officials. You can expect more of your citizens. You can guarantee them the right to be heard, and not in a nominal sense. So transparency means that, yes, these meetings have to be recorded. Recorded means that Sandra is doing a great job taking notes, but that doesn't do justice to the video that can provide every detail and every color. She can't possibly transcribe everything that happens here. And so I would say, don't do the minimum required under transparency and truth in government. Do reach higher. Offer your residents a deep look inside, because if you have nothing to hide, then there's no reason to have these meetings happen off camera. There's no reason why any of this can't be public knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have two more public comments. Victor, Mr. May.
I was out for maybe a year of the town, but now I see that the process is going, and I'm very lucky that you are considering this important question for the town charter and all the governing documents. And my vision is that our charter is very outdated, and I believe that we can improve it, like to take a template from the state. Mostly the state issues a new template for towns, municipalities. So we can take this modern charter and to adjust to our needs, like governing board or something. But I believe also that our charter should be short, like American Constitution, only 2 or 3 pages and nothing more. And also, speaking about transparency, this charter should be very clear, and there should be no contradictions between us. That this is very any provision should be very understandable for anyone. That it is short and clear, and transparency is important, but it will be clear for everyone. And the other point is that we must have, besides of charter, we must have comments to this charter. For example, governing boards, and this charter must have references how the governing board works and what is their rights and everything. So there should be some kind of comments to the charter, which may be changed by commissioners, but maybe for some certain time. And besides of the charter, we must have special codes, for example, building code or administrative code or some I don't know, maybe some other codes. It means that we need to update our building code, because in our charter and also we must have a journal of ordinances accepted by commissioners. And this journal of ordinance must be limited by time. For example, one commission works and issues one ordinance, but the other commission, when enters the power, they can change it or continue to do this.
Thank you.
Good evening. I promise not to be so wordy.
Name and address for the record?
Jeffrey Platt, 9225 Collins Avenue. I urge you guys to not make any changes, at least to this part of the charter. It's worked perfectly for the last forever, and it does not need any changes. There's one article that I know the corrupt people in town want to change, the height of the oceanfront buildings. You know, that's people who are in developers' pockets, because not one resident who lives in Surfside wants the height of oceanfront properties to be raised. Not one. Not one resident. If there's one, I'd like him to raise his hand. We could find one that wants to raise the height limit. The only those who want to raise the height limit are those who are going to make a lot of money from developers paying them off to change the rules, like a free trip to Dubai. Thanks.
Speaking from this side.
State your name and address for the record.
Chava El Gamil, 325 92nd Street. So I'm just here as a resident who loves Surfside, and I just want to say, like, as you guys are going and reviewing the entire charter throughout the process, is just to sort of have an overview of like what this town could look like in 50 years, and that as you're making these recommendations, that you kind of think about smart growth and smart development as opposed to just piecemealing things, so that you have an overall flavor of what this town is, what it could look like in 50 years, not just 10 years, 5 years, or 20 years, like really kind of decide, like, going forward, like if your kids decide to live in your homes, or you want to, give it to your children, what they're going to be living with. Obviously there are things that we can't foresee, or things that we do know, such as the water rising and being told that our homes, if we ever tear them down or need to rebuild them, they got to go 6 feet above, what they are right now, and kind of knowing that and saying, okay, if we did, top down or a neighbor view, and what will our homes look like, the balance of condos to houses, and when we're building and having that permeable ground so that there's water runoff issues, and where that water's going, because it's going into my garage, I don't know about yours, but where that water ends up, and really having smart growth for the entire town, that it just has like a nice, look and feel to it long term, so that we're not just like, oh, right here, this house is gonna go up to 50 feet, wide by high, don't worry about it, just this house, and next, every single house does that. And it's like, okay, that's fine, like everybody can do what they want on their property, so according to the code, we're not taking away rights, but just really having an idea when we're going through this, where this is gonna lead, and what can it look like, and how to make sure there's smart growth, there's green spaces, there's open spaces, and all that, as an overall, and really long term. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're closing public comments again. We're good. Thank you for all those who participate in the process. It's important that people show up and participate. I guess we'll start with the preamble. Does any members of the board? Okay, preamble is complete. Citizens Bill of Rights. I guess we'll start again like we did last time with town staff. Is there any issues, concerns, items that the town staff would like to bring to the board in regards to the Citizens Bill of Rights? That town staff.
Sorry, town staff, I'm sorry.
I guess I could note just for the record that the Citizens Bill of Rights mirrors the Miami-Dade County Citizens Bill of Rights. I don't have any particular recommendations to adding or removing or anything as to the Citizens Bill of Rights.
And can we add a line that making Surfside makes you more special than just Miami-Dade County?
Next question. Have they changed their Citizen Bill of Rights in any way that we should be aware of? That when's the last time we sort of reconciled to?
I think you said 27.
That's obviously we added Miami's experience in a lot more.
They're almost identical.
Okay.
Verbatim. Surfside actually added the Citizens Bill of Rights in 2012.
Okay.
That's pretty new. Anybody have any, assuming everyone's read the Bill of Rights, anybody have any comments, changes, anything they'd like to bring up for it? Okay, Bill of Rights is complete. On to Article 1. I guess we'll kind of take this as is. Start with, is there any items, issues that the town staff see with Article 1?
No, just keep in mind Article 1. You have various sections at a time. I don't know how quick is the will of refer to Billy walk through, but Article 1 has various sections within it.
Well, I'm going to ask you on behalf of the entire thing because I don't think there's going to be that many questions about it. If it becomes a long conversation, we'll break it down section by section. So that the entire Article 1, is there any comments or concerns from staff regarding Article 1?
Just to clarify, moving forward so that to be structured consistency of this, are you seeking upfront to have just staff input and recommendation for Article 1 on all topics, and then you discuss? Just try to frame it in such a way.
Yeah, I think it's best that we get the town staff opinion on the matters, especially as we go deeper in. There's conflicts and issues that arise, which our town staff is more familiar than as volunteers on this board over here. So it's...
Chair, I hear you clearly. We always provide our input. I highly recommend this be a discussion amongst yourselves, and we provide the input as needed. Otherwise, I hate to say we're the ones directing this conversation. We don't have any recommendations. This is truly the charter of the residents of the town of Surfside, and I encourage you to have a discussion and us to just provide you the information that could better assist with your recommendations.
If I may, just for informational purposes, because I was here. So this section 4 was amended by voter approval in 2 sections, or 2 instances in section 4. I can tell you what those 2022 changes are, so you have that knowledge, okay? Section 4, the first paragraph, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, about 7 lines down. The town shall not sell, lease, for a term in excess of 3 years, or exchange, any town-owned real property, unless such sale, lease, or exchange is approved by at least 4 members of the town commission, and a minimum of 60% of the town electors voting at a regularly scheduled election or special election of the voters would approve such sale, lease, or exchange of town-owned property. That was a 2022 change. The second change in 2022 that I'm aware of is the last paragraph in that section 4. And it starts also about line 7 where it says lot area of lots shall only include the area or acreage within the lot lines of a lot, except that for properties east of Collins, lot area shall be limited to the area bounded by the north, south, and west lot lines and the bulkhead line on the east, not the erosion control. That sentence was added. Also, the next sentence, height for properties east of Collin Avenue shall be measured from the elevation determined by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection for the first floor as of 2004. It has the NABD standard, such that a maximum height of 120 feet to the structured roof shall not exceed plus 136.63 NABD. Also, part of that change was the second to last line. Any changes to this section need to be approved by a minimum 60% vote of the elected. It was also added in 2022. And we have the parentheses after that section. Just to tell you what that is, it indicates every single town action by resolution that has amended that section. And you'll see the last change was resolution 22-2855, and that was done in 22.
So I got just a quick question on that. The 120-foot height, is all of our buildings right now in that compliance? Is there any building that's currently exceeding that number?
Of course.
When you the roof itself has certain features on top of it, and some of those features may exceed. That answers your question.
So I'm saying, like, if any building was being built now, would they be outside of it? Would any building that's currently existing in Surfside, would that not be able to be built now because of this thing?
I don't believe so. No. Okay. Right now, correct. The intent of this is you can't go more than 12 stories. Yeah. That is the intent.
And I think it's a fantastic thing to have a maximum. It actually creates boutique luxury. It's fantastic, and it keeps the residents small and wonderful. I mean, I would definitely not be in favor of changing the FCM next door. People are saying we're here tonight to change the 120 foot. I can speak for myself.
How do we have a discussion?
We can, I mean,
Can we do
yeah,
that
yeah,
now?
now, you can talk about, so just.
That's a moment.
Mr. Chair? Deputy Clerk can't hear you when you speak.
I want to speak very loud.
We're so
Okay.
far away.
We
Can we
turn
just
that
grab a
way.
microphone or something? Because this is gonna be tough.
Yeah, come sit with us.
Next time.
Next time,
she'll
trust
bring it
me.
up.
Yes.
So the way this process works
Yeah.
is when we're sitting here with the machine rolling and everyone here, we can talk about anything however we want. Once we leave this spot, the only thing we can talk about is anything except about this. So we
Right.
can talk about our families,
Got it.
everything else is fine. You just can't talk about the items that come before us. So now you're free to speak.
I would like to just talk to the,
Yeah.
full. Are you on the committee? No, you're commissioner.
She can't talk either. She can't talk, she can't talk. They all have to listen to us now. It's great.
So, a couple things, and somebody made the comments about like future proofing. We're doing this for 10 years.
Behind you, you have to
This
stand
is
in
this
my
is
way.
a 10-year program that we're trying to put together, right? So it's like, all right, everybody's trying to fortify their groundwater issues that have to that has to do with Miami-Dade, right? And it's happening in Overtown, which is 10 feet above sea level, or it's happening in Miami Beach. It's happening in every community in South Florida, and honestly, in most communities around the country, because a lot of things are happening, forest fires and all this. This is a discussion of our time, right? And my question to us is, what are the ideas or things that we want to allow, future development to do in order to sort of future-proof, Surfside? And that's sort of like the way I'm thinking about it. And I'm not saying raise the heights, but like the streets are eventually going to have to potentially go up, right? 2-3 feet, in order to, keep the water off. I've been living on the water since 2007 in Surfside. I don't see the water raising all that much, honestly. I mean, king tides are pretty bad, but what are the things that we want to do so when you build a new house or you build a new condo, like that should stand for 100 years, right? Whatever is in this code or whatever we're talking about needs to last the test of time.
They have that. Ask the attorney where in the charter, if we wanted to try to put that in, that would make sense.
But before, Mr. Chair, before we get to that, I would love to hear the town planner explanation on the heights that we have right now, right, for the different areas, because we have 3 basic areas in town.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful to understand.
Yeah, please.
So, what Mr. Bravo was referring to, you could say like the residential area as one section, and then between Harding and Collins as a second, and then east of Collins as a third. It's divided into more of the districts, not in practicality, but in terms of, east of Collins, it's capped at 120 feet, as it's written here. With the NAVD calculation as it was, and that's incredibly strict.
Well, can you ask what NADV is?
Please.
Like in layman's terms.
I'm not gonna have to remember the actual, what the, basically it's.
Just in
It's a point-
conversational
It's a point underground that the USGS, US Geological Survey determines and sets forth for everybody all over the country. So basically, because when you're building, you can measure from various points. You say 120 feet. Well, where are you starting from? Are you starting from the ground? Are you starting from the crown of the road? Are you starting from the minimum finished floor level? So what this does is it lays out based on this national data point to make it standard for everybody. That's basically what it's doing. It's just standardizing where we're measuring from, so that the 120 feet means the same for everybody.
Insurance is a big issue in our community. I own some commercial real estate, and we have property that we can't get flood insurance on right now. So I want to also put that in the reality for our citizens as we review this. Do they look at this NAVD? Do they look at that NAVD to determine our insurance rates?
So, I mean,
are the simple language that we all agree on. I think that problem that I have, and that George, who was at the meeting prior, brought up, is the conflict, which I need some clarification on, in regards to the comp plan and the code, how this is intertwined, and it seems to create a line of contention, I think. So I'd like to get some clarification, and because we simply want to say the same things, where it's 120 feet and 12 stories. Why do we need to throw in these monkey wrenches in here? Does that make sense? Am I asking my question correctly? You understand the clarification?
Well, what she's trying to say probably is there any way we can rethink the code saying, okay, we allow 12 stories, depending what the flood situation is at that particular time, because we allow 12 stories east of Collins.
If we go that route, right, if we don't put a measurement, which I think is the way it's shown in here, it's gonna, 12 stories for you, what does it mean? 10 feet each?
Well, he's saying 12 stories and 120
It's
feet.
100.
So we locked those two
facts.
numbers in
Yeah.
there, that can't change. Now, the question is, if the building starts here, or the building starts here, that needs to be designed based on the floodplain.
I think it has to have, it has to be a dimension. It cannot be a number of stories. It has to be a dimension, which is
120 feet.
which is here.
Above the federal, what I'm
Right.
comfortable with is the federal.
Well, I guess the reason they have 12 stories, they don't want it to have people squeeze in 8-foot floors and have a 20-story building on 120 feet.
Right.
Obviously, Surfside at
12
this
or
point,
less.
but is not moving that direction. But you have the Moxie hotels, which are like 150 square feet, and they're squeezing people in. So that kind of protects against that. So the maximum 12 stories, maximum 120 feet.
If I may, that there is a limitation that existed before 2022, maximum 12 stories, right? Or 120 feet. What the change in 2022 added was the unit of measurement. Where do you measure? What is the uniform standard of measurement from where do you measure the 120 feet or the 12 stories? And that is what the 2022 change to create a uniform system of measurement. Where do you measure it from? It did not say it's going to be over 12 feet if established a unit of measurement. That's the standard that is set out here in the charter.
That's correct, Lily. When this was reviewed, Collins Avenue is not a zero slope roadway. Collins Avenue goes up and down. It's not as drastic as in a mountainous area, but it does go up and down. And you're talking about a difference of 12 feet, perhaps, from the lowest point to the highest point. So that's just along Collins Avenue within a mile stretch. You measure it, so depending on where you're at there, do you build buildings respective to the roadway? Because then you have buildings that have an incline, similar to the roadway. So establishing a fixed point establishes a fixed skyline. And that was the intent.
So I guess going back to what I'm saying is that I felt like there was not a conflict, but a lot of hoops or going about around it all these different ways when it simply said 120 feet, 12 stories. I don't want to, but there's something in the code, there's something in the comprehensive plan, and where can we be a little bit more efficient with the language?
This was the ballot question they just voted on in
Please,
2022.
you're out of order.
Okay, but it was the ballot question.
Please, you're out of order. So I guess the question maybe that we should ask, because this is not an issue with the 120, this is the entire town, whether it's commercial, residential. So I guess the thing is as a owner of property, right, you bought your property with 120 feet or 30 feet. And now all of a sudden in comes the government or FEMA and they say, well, you get 28, you get 26, you get 25. And that can continue to happen to you, and you can't go higher, so you're literally eroding your property value. So is there somewhere in this, I don't know if this is the right spot.
I do believe, like my own personal view on that is that those are three separate piece parcels. A house is in a condo. A business district is not a house or a condo. And I think they should be addressed as three separate elements.
But aren't they they're all owned by somebody.
Of course.
And they're all having that same, you bought something and now it's disappearing, not because it's actually disappearing, but because the water's going up and the restrictions are, like it's almost like you get a phone and all of a sudden, Apple starts slowing it down. That's not right.
Right. Yeah, I think theoretically, like, I think what you're saying is, where's the contradictions in this law? How do we make it more clear?
I'm more not really, we're all in agreement the 120, 12 stories. I'm having a problem with having to go to vote when why do we have to do that every 2004, 2018?
No, it's just not change, it's not gonna go.
Right, we don't change it.
Right.
There's no vote.
So,
This is already in the code. This is-
Right.
but the comp plan has to be voted. Which one is the voting? The charter. If you want to change anything in this charter, it needs to go to the voters. In particular, this section on density, intensity, and height requires minimum 60% of voter approval. It's a supermajority of the voters. So any changes go to the voters.
And that part never made sense to me.
This was on the last election ballot.
With 50% for a requirement of 60%, and I just still don't see how
But your
that's.
voters voted, the question said, do you want to increase the voting requirement to 60%?
And we voted yes.
And your voters voted yes.
The majority of this town, right?
The majority, right, but the majority of town made it's like, can God lift a rock? They can't, can God create a conflicts where, how do you vote for something that supersedes what you put in there? So if it takes XYZ to put it in there, why should it take XYZ plus 10 to take it out? It should be whatever goes in, goes out under the same, process. It's just, for me, it's just confusing. Like, imagine if it went in, okay, 50% of people say that we're going to make it 90%. Is that legal? So you only got 50% of people who are now takes 90% to undo what they do. Normally, there's a yin and a yang. That's it's.
I understand what you're saying, but at the time of voting, right? And I feel like if we are responsible with this town, we went to vote, right? And we did our research on this. That would be my first thought, right? So if we go and vote for this and we voted that yes to the 60%, the majority of this town said yes to the 60%, and the majority of this town said this is a maximum height.
Right, but then you have the majority of town who they want to change that, and now they're being superseded by a majority. It's just for me, it's a weird concept.
I understand what you're saying.
Mr. Mayor, you got
Another question, was it a separate ballot item or was it tied to? So you had a lot of some of the ballot questions, were tied one thing with the other. You want to offshore drilling with the hands at the same time. If they say no, you agree that people should vacate the house. That was an actual ballot question by the county. So was it that, do you want to lock in with 120 feet by 60%, by 51%, and you can only be overturned by 60? Or did you just give me a ballot question and said, hey, we want to put things into the charter at 51 and require 65 to pull it out, or a supermajority? Because then I would agree with you, the voters voted on that. But if you tied it in with something that we all wanted, which is let's lock in the buildings at 120 feet, that's a little tricky.
Right,
You start throwing things into a ballot question, knowing that this will pass, so let's put something else in there. That's a little dirty.
So if the comp plan says there's a version, I'm trying to understand the 2004 and now 2018 and soon to be 2025 comp plan in place, it's in contradiction to the code.
Can you tell me just after the election, just now?
There's a contradiction somewhere that I'd like to get a better understanding of. I could understand what you
I think you're talking
perceive
about
it to be.
George said every certain amount of time, the town has to redo the comprehensive plan. But this is saying you can't change the comprehensive plan unless you have 60% of the vote. So how can you, that's the conflict? Is that what you're trying to do?
There's a conflict between.
But
You can change the comprehensive plan according to the legal process anytime. In fact, the state mandates periodic review and updates. However, putting that aside, the density, intensity, and height is limited to what's in the comp plan and the code in 2004, period. It's soon to be, it's an imposed restriction. If it's less restrictive in a subsequent code, less restrictive in a subsequent comp plan, you're tied to the 2004, correct?
So it's so it's not really a conflict, because it's what it was in 2000. Rather than listing all of 2004, it just said, okay, look at this document, everything in here locked. So you still have to review it, but
As to density, intensity, and height.
so it's not really conflicts.
Well, I don't think conflict is the right word. I mean, to your point about clarity, it could be clearer. It would have been helpful if in 2004 they put down exactly what they wanted. But I think we all understand the intent. It just, because it's referring back to an out-of-date document, but we know what's in there and so we're able to enforce it. So if you think about the charter as where the rights and abilities flow from, so there's the charter and then the comprehensive plan, which is every 7 years the state mandates us to review it and then provide any updates based on legal things that the state might have changed in that time period or that we might have changed. Sometimes towns annex additional land and we have to update based on that. We're going to update the comp plan over the next year. There's not going to be, I don't foresee any substantial changes to that. And what's in the comp plan then flows into the zoning code. So the rights are kind of, the changes to the comprehensive plan to the code would have to agree with this.
Question for the planner. Do you foresee that any state mandated updates would involve density, intensity, and height?
That the state would require us to make changes to that? No.
Typically, those types of changes are not what the state gets involved.
No, there's some update about property rights, and that's our land use plan, our land use attorney's update. But in terms of those three things, no.
I'm trying to get clearer as I'm thinking this all out. So if the charter, like in hierarchy, so there's the charter, right, comp plan, and then code. Would that be fair to say that? Like, so if that's the case, could the charter be cleaned up and we take dates out? It could if the voters approved the change.
Yeah.
But right now, the way it's written and the way it's in the charter and approved by the voters is density, intensity, and height are tied to whatever is in the 2004 code and comp plan. Whichever is more restrictive is
right. Right. As a commission, we could say, okay, we want to propose that the new code has specific numbers and guidelines to avoid referring to 2004, let's say.
So then we would have to get.
And then we go to vote
60%
You
vote.
could propose a change to this section. I mean, you could propose anything.
We just simply state
Yeah.
what we seem
Correct.
to all be in
Right.
agreement here, everybody on both sides of the room, with the 120 maximum and the 12 stories. It's just that the dates seem to throw in a monkey wrench or make it a little messy in the charter. That's what I'm saying.
Obviously, I wasn't here in 2004, but I think it was clear to the previous town planners that that was the intent. So that's what is in the comprehensive plan. It's in the zoning code. So I would, unless you disagree with it, I don't know that it's worth the effort to.
Right, you're
change the
gonna
language.
put forward a resolution which is require a 60% vote in order to clarify and be where we are today. So if you want to change it, like the part that I was confused about was the
Talking out loud.
was the NAVD, right? If there's a better measurement that you feel that the people should have done, that's a topic to do. But if we're just going to say let's clean this up so it's easier to read, I think that's a lot of work to.
Although it's town planner, I appreciate the effort.
Stuff and, that's, I'm more from the perspective of the creative perspective of future-proofing, the town. So it's like, I've heard the commission, I think recently approved understories for people's homes. Is the current home height realistic? With an understory, that saves the town. And if in the future, in the next 100 years, people build all these things, we get hurricanes. I mean, we live on a barrier island, right? Like, there's a lot of water that comes on hurricanes, and you saw what happened in the west coast of Florida, right? The homes that stood were all up higher on. I mean, I don't have the stats, but I know from visiting over there and seeing the devastation that the homes that survived are the ones that were sort of future-proof, right? They had understories. They do a lot of understories on the west coast. Is that something we want to incentivize our citizens to do, right? That only increases the value of our community, because a town like Surfside, where we have as old the structures as we have, if we got hit by that same hurricane, this town would look a lot different today. You know, and that like, you know, we don't know if and when that happens, but you know, that's something that as a owner of a piece of property, if I was to rebuild my house, I would want to put myself in the best position to win.
Okay, but the question would be, what change in the code would allow owners to be more prepared?
You had an idea, give a foot, get a foot. I don't know exactly
I didn't
what that meant,
invent this, but I've heard it. I've heard this over here.
This is a discussion I think that we are charged to have as the
I mean, I guess the idea
committee. You know, not.
I think that the concern is people don't want to have where all of a sudden someone's building their home 60 feet in the air, everything else is 30. So you have to have a limit, but the limit should raise, at least in my opinion, the limit should raise with everybody. So if we're working off of the floodplains, and right now it's, you know, the floodplains are XYZ, whatever government establishment that is not
some number
that's not political, right? That's a real number.
Right. I got it.
That over time, as that goes up, we don't have to sit here and say, we have to change all the codes again. We have to go to 35 feet and still measure off the ground. It should be 30 feet measuring from wherever building can be. So, you know, if that's 4 feet off the ground this year, next year it might be 6 feet off of the ground. But tying it to NABD just seems to, like, you know, when the world is changing, right, our seawalls are going up, our beach walls are going up, everything's going up.
Right.
And we don't want to give people more property value. We want everyone to have the same property value they had when they bought it for now. So if a hurricane comes through and knocks down their home, and now they have their 30 feet to build, they don't have, you know, 22 feet to build.
Right. Do we want to think about what, you know, and I'm not a builder, right? So like, what would be if like Miami Beach is 35 feet, right? That's their top, right? So if we went to 35 feet, what would like FEMA recommend my first floor being on? You know, like what would that number be? 8 feet, 9 feet, 10 feet, maybe? You know, like I want to incentivize people to go higher than, you know.
Right, but your 35 is giving 5 more feet. It doesn't. The bottom doesn't matter based on the top, right? So how much space you have to build, and then where you started are two separate conversations. So I mean, I don't think anyone here, I mean, unless they want to propose to change, you know, height limitations, but I think the idea is to maintain your amount. So if you're basing it off of FEMA plans, right? And right now, where can you start? You said it was like 2 feet or something. How do you measure where you can start your home?
It's NGV. It's based on base flood is 8, and then Surfside has an extra 2. So we do have some room if FEMA were to raise it to 9. You know, we're already at 10, so we're a little bit ahead of FEMA. So we have space.
So that's 10 feet of the 30 feet.
No.
No.
So that's
You
measured
start
from, it's like imaginary, it's not imaginary, but this point under the ground. So it's difficult to explain. So because that way it makes it standard. So and that's how, you know, the federal government does it. So it's measured from this point underground up to 10 feet.
How far on the ground?
What that comes to in reality in most places is about 6 feet from grade. 5, 6 feet.
To add a relative point, that 10 is equivalent to that 16.63. So that means you're measuring at that as your 60.63 is your 0, your 10 is your 0, you go 30 up for the residential, you go 120 in the east.
And that's your minimum for habitable space. That's why we had the ordinance that allowed for an understory, so that's non-habitable space.
Right,
you
of
can
course.
put your car and your bikes or whatever underneath, but you can't live there.
So where in a house today where you have 30 feet, if you do an understory, right? What is the height of that understory in today's law?
So, well, there's not a minimum or a maximum, but if you're trying to get the 30 feet, that's why it's confusing. 30 feet is measured from the crown of the road,
Right.
which might be a foot above actual grade. So it depends on what it comes out to in reality, but you have that 30 feet. So the minimum you would want to have the understory is 7 feet to be able to park a car and to have head clearance and everything underneath. So then you have the other 23 feet to play with.
Right. You're gonna put like air conditioning and stuff like that.
Well, we have allowances for things on the roof. You can put that is separate. So your architect has to, you know, figure out where they're going to put the plumbing and the deck work and all of that kind of stuff.
My question to us, as the people that recommend, right, is like, do we want to incentivize this type of building? Do you want to give people like that, you know, if you're going to make your house higher, right, like, do you want to incentivize them with more feet or not, right? Like, versus putting dirt down below, because isn't there more isn't that more environmentally friendly from a building perspective? Because if you build an understory, you would have more grass and gravel and less permeate.
More
What is the word?
permeability, more. You would have more. So I can't comment on its impact
We're
on
a
the environment
sponge.
as a whole. What the ordinance requires is when you have that understory, 20% of your lot coverage, whatever 20% of your lot is, you have to keep as pervious, so rainwater can go.
I don't understand. So you said you're measuring from NAVD, right? NAVD is a spot in the road. But then the town puts in requirements to go higher than that. You can't build at NAVD. You have to build, you can't. No.
Yes, so right, so there's base flood elevation, and then we have +2 on top of that.
Right.
So 2 additional feet above the minimum.
But when you start to that 2 feet from the minimum, so now you're at the minimum height, do you now have 30 feet to build your home? Or you're now at 28 feet or 26 feet or something like that?
30.
No, you have 30, and that is measured from the crown of the road.
So you have 30 from the ground.
So it's more complex because
that
you have measures and then you got the crown on the street.
Right.
So your 30 starts in the crown of the street.
So your 30 starts at the crown of the street, but really the town is telling you you can only start building here.
So you get 30 from there.
Please, this is not part of your. So you're not getting 30 feet from where you're saying we can build. You're getting 30 feet from down here.
Yes.
So.
But the other part is, part of your house, but yeah.
Sorry. So yeah, but you can't build it, right? You're starting. You can't live in it. So the town originally gave you 30 feet to live in. Now the town is giving you 24 feet to live in. How many feet is it giving you to live in?
Of habitable varies again based on where you are in town, but that's about.
So what we should be fixing here is to make sure that regardless of where the town says you have to build from, you will always be able to get your 30 feet. Right? I think that's because that way it doesn't matter. The crown of the road is great and all, but the town is also saying, hey, you have to build high. And then when you're building high, you're losing your property value because you can now build 24 feet. And in 2 years from now, it might be 23 and a half feet. And in 15 years from now, it might be you're down to 20 feet. And now your ceilings are much lower, things are changing, and we're all locked into this charter requirement. So I mean, I don't know how we want to do a directive, but it seems everybody here wants to fix that part of it so that we're giving, as we take away from people, we're giving them back on the top side. So they're getting 30 feet of habitable space, not 30 feet from the crown.
I think there's two things. One is the understory conversation, right? And like, is that something we want to incentivize, right? Because if I have a neighbor and they
don't incentivize anybody, these are rights.
Well, you have the right word, but like if you give you get more height because you're building that under bit, so you have more, the rain can go through your house versus.
It's a planning issue.
Well, you can't change the height without this change.
Correct. So, I mean, what I would propose would be to change the measurement so you always get your 30 feet from whatever the town's requirement is to go up. So if the town says you have to start at 8 feet above this point, you get 30 feet from that point.
Right. Let me ask you a question. With the houses that we're building now, which are per code, right? And according to what we have in here, we see the height, right? We see how high they go. Are those houses in any risk within the next 10 years?
So I'm not a climatologist, but I will tell you that
the whole basis of the conversation has been.
But the town manager and with the direction of Commissioner Maishan, we took a look at the seawall heights in town and what the regulation for those should be. And we did a review with a consultant about what the seawall heights are around town, and they took a look at that, what the projected sea level rise is. And so we're going to bring forth at the next commission meeting a recommendation to raise the sea level.
Which is something that.
Seawall heights.
But that you can do, because it's not locked.
Exactly.
Sure, but to your point about sea level rise, the recommendation that we're bringing forth is a 6.5 NAVD height, which is still well below our baseline.
Yeah.
And so that's what they've determined is going to be sufficient to protect us from.
So if we're building those structures to a level below what we can do here in the housing area, right? Why we're gonna raise this area?
You're not raising the area. What you're doing,
why we're gonna allow
right now,
taller houses?
Because right now what they're doing is the town has decided you got the 8 feet. We're throwing 2 more feet on. So your bottom level you can go is 10 feet off of whatever number. In the meantime, where you're allowed to build your home, you originally were supposed to get 30 feet to build your home. That number is shrinking, and we don't know how far it'll shrink and when it will stop shrinking. But people who built here 30 years ago were able to build 30 feet. Now you're able to build 22 feet.
For clarity, I don't know what the number is, but you were never able to build right at grade level. There was always a minimum that you have like finished floor for a house. So I don't know what that was in 2004, if that's the date that we were interested in. But there was always a minimum.
But it was much smaller. You have most houses, you walk right into them. There's no steps, there's no stairs. Now you're walking into houses up a flight of stairs. So if you're going up a flight of stairs, it's a lot of extra feet. And you don't get that, now that you've raised your house up to work with the environment, which we have to do because the environment is, king, we now have lost that as buildable space in their home.
Let's talk about.
Raise the height.
But you cannot build any, right? Before your roof was at 30 feet. Now your roof is still here, but you instead of starting here, you're starting here.
That's totally correct.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong. That is your first floor elevation. Your baseline. Your baseline. Okay. That is your baseline. From there you go up. Whatever the number is. In this case, 30.
So you go up 30.
Am I correct?
No. Sorry.
No, please. That's the way it is.
Because there's 2 different units of measurement that we use. So the 30 feet has traditionally always been from the crown of the road. And so when a new house comes in, we require them to get a certificate of elevation and a survey to verify what that is. And there's slight variations throughout town, not a whole lot.
It's not a lot, that's correct, because in your town, you're between 4 and 5.5 for the most part. Roadway.
Right. So your finished floor is going to be higher than the crown of the road, and that's the 10 NGVD. The finished floor has to be 10 NGVD, but the house can only be 30. So if FEMA were to change their regulations and bring, I think this is not a likely scenario, but if they were to change their base flood elevation that they're willing to certify up, Mr. Jacobson is correct. Our cap is based on the crown of the road, but the base flood can change.
But that is, yes, yeah. FEMA can come and change that base flood elevation, agreed.
But we're already 2 feet above
Exactly.
what that minimum is.
We created a buffer
have,
for ourselves.
Yes.
If
we're at 8, I believe.
Yes, I hear you.
What the discussion is now. But we're 2 above.
The problem is that the crown is not going up with the government regulation.
Right.
If the government regulation would push the crown of the street, no issue for the homeowners. But because the government can push that level, but the crown will not move up, then the total size of the house.
I like your idea.
So from a code perspective, is there any way we could say that the 30 feet should be measured from the government level, not the crown?
That's up to you.
Right.
So that's the comment.
Well, not in the code. This is a charter.
No, but in the charter to give
In the
people the
charter.
rights so that they're not being locked in. Because right now it's locked in that the town can't give that to you. So we would have to then amend the charter to give that right to the residents that if the government comes and says you can only start here or you can only start here, you still have the rights to your property. it's a very basic thing.
But where, for what measurement?
I would like the measurement to float with the government, what are we using to determine
They're 2 feet lower right now.
But to that point, right? Right now, the government is saying 8. So let's say that in 2 years, they're gonna say 8.5. We're still below what we require here. So
Surfside might go to 10.5.
Why?
Because they want to keep that extra space. It goes back to the town planner and all that things. I'm saying as a homeowner, you should have if the government decides to change where you can build your home, they should give you back that right on the top of your
I understand what you're saying, but the government already gave us a height here, right? 8.
They didn't give you anything.
Oh, they're constructing.
The FEMA gives a level where you're allowed to go to. The town adds 2 additional feet.
10.
Those keep going up, but where you can build your house from has nothing to do with that. It goes back to where the road is.
Do we have the 10?
And I would argue that over the next few years, FEMA is going to get a lot more aggressive.
Oh yeah.
Okay, and that's coming. And for what it's worth, they've already established this now.
Let's give Mary Ann a chance to
Just
comment here.
to ask a question.
Sorry, Commissioner Mitchell, sorry.
Do the homes always have 30 feet, regardless of where you start to count? That was my impression going to all the PG meetings. That they have 30 feet for their home.
You have 30 feet from the crown of the road.
No.
That's the standard that we've
That's result.
traditionally used. You have the 30 feet is counted from the crown of the road, which is the middle part of the road. That's when we get the elevation certificate to determine what that height is and compare that to the NGVD standard.
GVD measurement? The H120 is measured with
NAVD.
NAVD. Can the homes, does that relate to the homes to keep that?
There's a conversion factor, so
I mean, could you just say that instead of crown of the road, or?
Well, you could say whatever unit you want. The question is right now they're at 30 feet, and that 30 feet is a visual 30 feet, what people can see. And do you want that to be higher? Because if you can have the 30 feet from base flood, then the house is going to be at 35, 36 high.
And the houses from today will, in theory, be 4 feet shorter than the houses from 10 or 15 years from now, or 30 years from now. Whatever the numbers work, it will slowly rise up as the government raises those floodplains. But you will still have your 30 feet of building no matter what happens, no matter what the government tries to do.
This is reviewed again in 10 years.
So that's it.
It's got to be at the table.
If you look at the FEMA flood maps that 8 plus 10 was used,
We start talking.
they were not adopted yet, but they will be. And there's a certain amount of time for the revise again. And by then, you'll have another charter review board to reassess that. But that
But
8
people are
plus 10.
building today for 100 years. The buildings are building, the houses they're building are going to be, my house.
No, the question is, if
40.
we expect that that's going to be reviewed in 10 years, what are we doing here, right? Like,
We're going to go home now.
yeah, in 10 years, if it happens, I'm going to review. But the question is, can we make...
I think this is the type of discussion that we have to have, and this is why we're here, right?
So what does the comp plan say, and what does the code say? Because the code, you have the planning department, they're charged with setting this, making these decisions, hearing from the public, have planning workshops is what's best in regards to like a foot to a foot, go higher. I'd like to see the houses go to 35 feet myself, with the habitable space underneath, light and air, not filling them in. But that would be something I would bring to a workshop, and the code would be changed. So in regards to the code and the comp plan, what are we charged with in making charter?
So it comes to what rights we want to give the residents. So in theory, right, we could go back and amend this entire thing and say 2004, and then except we're going to give 35 feet to homes, right? We as a charter review can change the entire structure of this if we want to.
Oh, of course.
The question is, what do we want to tackle, right? Because if we spend this amount of time on every single event we're doing, we're going to be here to the end of the world, and it could go to the commission can say, yeah, we don't like it and get rid of it anyway, and it gets the voters, or vice versa. So we're trying to come up with things here that will pass all the way across and not really make policy.
And we're not taking away from what the town planners are doing. We want to make sure that the charter reads or is well versed and is not in conflict with the code or the comp.
Right, but right now everything is locked in place. So if you every year those homes will lose a foot, and at some point, right, it's the difference between 24 and 30 when you're doing a property, you can make it work. When you get down to 20 feet, now you have 10-foot ceilings instead of 12 or 14. It will eventually over time. So the question is, do we want to tackle this now and say, let's fix this so the measurements are not based on the static road, but they're based on the government plan. You get your 30 feet no matter what. Or do we just say, forget it, move on. When people lose their homes, then they'll start complaining, and then they'll come and demand it, and that'll be changed.
I like what Lori's saying, and I don't know if structurally how to incorporate it into a code or whatever it is, but like, because the question is for us: do we want it? Like, if you build an understory, it isn't that feasible to do an understory that has any like 8 feet clear, because you're not going to build this like short understory, right? Right? Is it reasonable to give people that do an understory like a few more feet so they can build a house on top that doesn't have like 8-foot ceilings? Because if you're going to build an understory today, like you're going to have like maybe 10-foot and 8-foot ceilings after you put all your mechanical and all that stuff in there, right? So my vision, especially for the dry houses that aren't even on water, like like giving them a few more feet would, I think it would have a great impact on our town. But
I mean, you could instruct them to add 5 feet to the home, to basically add, take this and add 5 feet, and they will put that in, and they'll go for a vote, and everyone will get 5 feet if you want to do that.
If they build, if they have more of an, less impact residents, in their home. I mean, that.
But you can't legislate that.
Mr. Platt, sorry.
Well, if the charter doesn't allow for the commission to change that.
Correct. So you would basically say that, okay, we see 2004, but the attorneys would write a thing. If you build another story, you get 5 more feet.
Right. There you go. I'm in favor for that. Lori, I don't know where you stand on this, but I think
I'm trying to rewrite the charter so that I can get my point across.
I don't know if that is necessarily, Ben, you seem like you understand this process better than I do, but like, we tell them kind of like what we want to achieve,
and they write up the legal.
Yeah, they do the contract. Kind of thing.
For me, it's not about adding more or taking out. It's just making sure that no one lose in time.
Right.
If regulation changes, no one loses the 30 feet that is in the 2004 code. Right?
So that's like almost like an owner's
But again, if the regulation changes, right, they're not going to get to the level that we have now because we're more restricted.
No, but again, one step, then go to the next step, right? Because this is evolution, right?
Absolutely.
10 years, 20 years. So we want a charter to be ready for the next 30 years or 40 years. How can we do that? Let's make sure that the evolution of the government code will not impact the total amount of size, buildable size that we can have. That's it.
Right. I think the way to say it is that if you build it on the story, you get a certain extra amount of space, and do we have time to like go sit with an architect and ask what that amount would be, right? Like before you make your recommendation, I'm sure we bring it to the commission.
We can always bring it.
That's illegal.
Lori said.
Oh yeah, so we have an architect. Perfect. So
As I said, I'd like the height to be 35.
Right, and then for all other homes that don't do an understory, they will get, if FEMA increases the ability, that number, like they go up, they're going to go aggressive the next 10 years. I promise. Like you see what's going on in the world. The storms are getting stronger. All this stuff. Like if they say the flood levels here, then everybody gets that 2 extra feet on the top side.
So I'm hearing two things here.
Based on G, whatever D.
I'm hearing two separate things here. There's an incentive that you want to give to people who do the understory.
Yes.
So you're asking that the zoning be zoning plus 5 for anybody who does an understory. In addition, as I've kind of advocated for, I think Ezekiel said the same, that The measurement needs to be based on the floodplain, not the crown of the road, so that you're always getting your 30, or in your case, 35 feet if you're doing the understory as the incentive.
Right. As long as that is, like, from an architect's perspective, fair for the community, because I don't know what floodplain is and, you know, all that stuff.
Quick question to better understand this, try to get clarity. Point that you have to build above. I believe it's BFE plus 1, we're establishing BFE plus 2.
Right.
Are you saying the 30 feet starts at that number? Up?
Correct.
So when we number,
Correct.
so technically, what you're trying to, is that where you start the 30 feet. Now, because the BFE is already a driver, there's already a bigger agency entity, it's just FEMA that controls that number, so we're not tying a number to, it's already tied.
Right.
We have to build to that number.
We are now tying 30 feet to BFE, to BF, whatever the town is, so BFE plus 2, whatever the town's regulation is, that's where we're tying the 30 feet.
Rather than plus 1, we're at a plus 2, which is that's the town taking the
That's the town, so if the town wants to do BFE plus 4, you now have BFE plus 4, 30 feet. And that's up to, you know, and that way, if all the future, you know, commissions, they can change it, they can move it, but the town's buildable, the owner's buildable space will never change. And then in addition to that, they also want to increase, for people who do an understory, 5 feet.
Right.
So let me understand, if you want 30 feet, right? So that's how many stories per house?
Do we have a story?
Yeah, feet. So, but at the moment, there's a maximum of 2 feet in the single family district.
Two stories.
2 stories.
So you can have, in theory, under this, you will always have 2 15-foot.
Minus the, you know, slab and.
Yeah, whatever they calculate, but you will always have your 30 feet, and if you do an understory, you will always get an extra 5 feet that the is built understory.
And I'm not set up 5 feet, that's illegal.
I'm just trying to get us all to a consensus to where, if everyone's okay with that, then they draft it up, it comes back, and we can take a look at it. But is everybody okay with both of those? Those are 2 separate points. So let's start with point A. Point A is everyone okay with changing the charter so that when your building goes based on BFE, your 30 feet start at the town's BFE plus, and I don't know how to describe that.
Can I just ask the planner if is that even playing field for everybody? If we made it BFE plus 30?
No, plus. The BFE, the town's BFE plus 2 is where, or whatever BFE plus, whatever town does, that would be your start at 30.
Instead of the crowd.
Instead of the crowd. You would
Right.
change it from the crowd.
I'm not sure what, I mean, I understand what you're saying. What do you ask? Is that
feasible? Is
that fair? Is that feasible? Do you find that equitable?
Well, then, I mean, that's the question for the attorney, how that would go. I mean, because really, when we talk about height and things, really, the place for that is really in the zoning code. So we also have to make changes.
The 2004 code and comp plan do not allow for that.
It has to be done here.
Then you have to change the charter.
Correct.
Correct.
So
that's what we're trying to
Our
do.
proposal will be changing it, charter, going to a vote, and, you know, asking people if
And
they
I'm not
want
so
to.
sure that that's not currently the case, right? That it's not measured, the height is not measured from the lowest elevation.
We've been discussing this for a while, and I
I'm not
don't
sure that
think,
that's not already
and I
the
don't
case.
think we all actually understand many of the topics that we're discussing here in the sense of where this is measured, what is the current height according to the code.
So we could do something. We could come back to you at the next meeting with concrete information as to what is in the 2004
Drawings,
code.
where we're allowed to start, where the amounts are, like nice, good pictures and.
Because I'm not sure that that's not already permissible. In other words, that you measure the height from the lowest elevation, right? The lowest elevation.
It says it in the charter, that in ADD.
No, that standard
That's
is
for
only
the-
applicable to properties east of Collins in the H120.
So you want to
You're
widen
referring
this
to single-family homes.
Correct.
That's what
Yeah,
that's-
yeah.
Right.
Okay. So if there's any confusion, we can come back at the next meeting and clarify what is currently permissible under the charter.
Right, but I think the answer that we got, unless that's incorrect, was that you cannot build 30 feet right now in Surfside.
Well,
Jeff Rose.
it depends on how you're counting 30 feet. I mean, I would say that's what
30
people are
feet of
clearly.
livable, inhabitable space. You
Yeah.
cannot build 30 feet of inhabitable space at this time. Based on the floodplains, right? Okay.
I'm I'm sure that that's accurate, but let us come back to
So you'll come back, yeah.
And let us be clear about what is currently permitted pursuant to the charter, which is.
Right, so I think we have, so do you want to talk about the understory?
We now have the idea. Now let's move over.
Sorry, and
the idea.
Mr. Chair, you're speaking only about single-family homes, the clarification that is needed.
Is there, let me just ask the one, is there any other areas that would be an issue in that, like is that?
No, you could apply the same for east of Collins, you could apply the same for between Collins and Hardy.
But why don't you include the multifamily, the small multifamily dwellings that exist like on.
So you're talking
Publix.
everything
Near
west
Publix.
Collins.
Yeah, Weston
That's
Collins.
those are other districts.
Oh, those are other districts?
That's why I was saying about, the rephrase.
If you're making an equitable change so that you go up with the water,
Right.
why would we exclude anything? Right? It's still the same, you get the same amount of space. If the government comes and says you can't start here, you gotta start here, so you have the same amount of space. Like, this seems very.
The impact is minimal
the entire
over
town.
time.
Over time,
Right.
every building will eventually move up 3 inches, 6 inches, 12 inches.
Right.
Because the water planes. And maybe at some point, we'll get an ice age and everything will start going down, and then we'll see the homes going down
So
again.
for the sake of the conversation, in the next meeting, we're gonna bring FEMA's projections on how this is gonna raise.
That's a whole other thing.
That's a whole other thing.
Yeah, I mean,
But
that's-
because we're talking about raising, right? So we need to bring that to the table.
Right, if we can do our own homework.
I want to be clear too, even if the measurement was the Crown of Road isn't changing.
What if
Then
we
you
raise
can
the-
change.
what if we raise the road?
That's a different conversation in itself, but the Crown of Road as a measurement is not changing anytime in the next, we don't have it in a 5-year nor 10-year plan to start raising crowns of roads. So keep in mind that as an anchoring number is not changing.
But that's stuck.
Well,
The
that's
other
the
thing
point,
is
that's the point,
moving.
because
That's
that's
the whole
not
problem.
changing, and the regulation could change.
But how do you change that number now?
BFC.
No. The Crown of Road is not determined by a BFC.
Yeah,
That's
no,
what
no,
I'm
no,
saying.
yeah,
We're
the
changing.
crowd will not change, let's say for now. Eventually, in 20 years, the government regulation could change. So the total height that you can build will be shorter.
Yeah, you're talking about for the building, not the Crown of Road, which is the measuring point requirement.
But the problem is that we have two different measurements being used. We have BFE being used, and then we have floodplain being used by where you're allowed to build. And these two are not in sync. So we want to just change it so that they're in sync. So if the where you're allowed-
Correction, it is in sync, it's just where you're measuring the 30 from is what your question is.
Yeah. Well, the Crown does.
How about if you bring back to us what's in the code, what's in the comprehensive plan?
But in doing that, you will see that some of these topics you're touching are code topics, and some of these topics are charter topics. But hopefully that creates clarity of what you want to clear up or define further in this proposal within the charter.
So if it's code, then we don't need to change this.
But the code can't be changed because it's locked into 2004 in the charter.
Right, but
then we
the
have
point
to
is
change
that
it
the
here.
code may be allowing you to do it, right? We don't have clarity, I don't have clarity on exactly how to start.
I'll also come back and find you clarity. I think
Yeah,
that's-
I
otherwise-
think you understand the concept. What the concept is that we're talking about is as FEMA changes their flood regulations, we want to make sure that the height goes along that line because, you know.
So your space is the same.
But I want to clear up something I want to clear up something really quick. If you're at a point where you're really worried about that change to be a substantial change and if it impacts a two-story home, right now you have buffer. You don't build 2 floors that are 12. I mean, you can still build a 2-story house, but if you're at a point now where you're evaluating how close you are over BFE and that measure of 30 feet to the point that it's 10, 15 years from now, and we're actually having that discussion that we don't have enough buffer, we have an even bigger question we need to be addressed. And that question, I think it's a little bit more obvious on that side. So I don't think we're there where we're evaluating that we're in that margin where we have to start reconsidering what Surfside means.
But right now, we already are down from 30 to 24 feet of building space.
You're still accomplishing a 2-story home successfully. You still have uninhabitable space, which in your attics, that you could still, you still have room. But once you start shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, you're gonna be at a point where you're not gonna be building a 2-story house anymore. Why? How high is that elevation gonna be? What's the bigger question to be had? But with that said, just keep in mind, that maybe we're trying to fix a problem when the problem is even a bigger problem.
Right, which brings up the second point with understories. because if a big hurricane comes through and there's storm surge and you have a lot less, obstacles, if you will, with 10-foot setbacks, 5 foot on each side, like the water's going to go through a lot easier, in a town that has space with 8-9 feet below that than it would without it. It's just.
And it's a solution that we have applied in the Keys.
Right, it's a solution they've done on the West Coast as well. Anybody who's been this close to the ocean, and I can hit a pitching wedge to the ocean from here. Okay, like, it's something that like I personally wouldn't build a house without an understory in this town but the math doesn't work. Like, you sit down with the architect, I'm like, my top floor is gonna have 8-foot ceilings. I'm like, I don't have 8-foot ceilings on my current house.
Well, we have to go to a good
So this is a
This is number 2.
This is a code issue. These are
But it's
issues.
not, because it's locked into the charter, they cannot change it in the code. Because it's locked in 2004.
These are items that you bring to the planning department, so that the planning department can make changes to height.
They can't.
They can't.
That's a problem, because when they make
It
this
says it right
code,
here.
it says here that they
You
are,
want to eliminate
this
that.
is stronger than the code. So when it says here, the measures of 2004, they go to the code, they cannot change nothing.
Well, okay, so I guess what I'm getting at is, you go to the code, know what you're allowed to build, with the heights, what the elevation could be out there. So, then we go to the code for that. Because it's not working because the flood level has risen, and the code's gonna,
Code can't be changed.
well, that's where we have to make.
And that's what we're trying to fix, is
Right.
if you create that floating number that's now not based off of a fixed point, it's based off of what people are allowed to build, it doesn't matter what happens to the floodplains, the people are fine. That was the first step. The second one is, all right, so they want to incentivize understories, so people do more understories. So as a benefit for doing understories, we're going to give you 5 extra feet, which again, they can't change because it's locked in the charter now. So normally these are all things that a town would solve at the commission level and should never get to us, but because it's all locked into the charter, all of these little nitty-gritty details, which should not be on our table, is gotten stuck on our table.
Yeah, and I agree. And also on that point is with what version of the comprehensive plan is being brought up to in front of everyone.
2004. It can't be changed without a vote by 60% of the population.
And so the 2004 comprehensive plan is that what's being,
That's what's in the charter. The charter
that's in the charter.
So we can make it more restrictive.
That is an outdated document, as far as operational document. We use now the 2018, and we're in the process of, but it's the anchoring of the 2004 is the language within it, but it's the anchoring language. Even though the document's outdated documents, the language is what's being carried on, which the question was asked earlier, do we want to carry those items from that language, put it here, remove the 2004, so now you're still saying the same thing.
Right, so how about removing the dates and
But
just
that-
putting in the numbers?
Well, I think there's 2 issues here.
Right.
Whatever the 2004 code and comp plan provide for the height and the stories in a single family home. And then there's, where do you measure?
Right.
Where do you measure that height from? What's the base from which you measure the 30 feet? It is the crown of road, as Judith indicated. The measurement starts at the crown of the road.
Right.
So what information are you looking to clarify, or just so we can be, are you looking to change the measurement standard from the crown of the road?
Yes, that's what we want to do.
Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
To change it to whatever the government, the starting height becomes. So that's FPE plus 2, that's FPE.
That's VFE.
BFE plus 2.
That's VFE, base flood elevation.
Base flood elevation is a number set by the federal government. BFE plus 1, I think, is the minimum standard for affordability goal to build by. We do a BFE plus 2, which is
correct.
But we don't want just BFE plus 2. We want BFE plus whatever the town in Surfside is doing. So if they go BFE plus 4, you now start the measurement at BFE plus 4. Whatever the government minimum is to start building, that's where the measurement should be.
Okay, just to be clear, the 2004 code said 30 feet from the crown of the road, period. That's the standard in the charter.
Right, so we want to change that.
So can you amend the charter to say, you know, hey, citizens, do you want to change it so it's, you know, 30 feet from BFE, and what this means for you is this? Like, is there, you know, these amendments, like, they might as well be a little bit Chinese sometimes, like, you can't really, like.
Well, that becomes, you have to, you know,
That's the
put out to
commission, that's
residents.
not our
That's
job.
not our job. Our job is to get the logistics stuff done. It's the commission's job to explain to the community.
To figure out the best way to do it.
And they might take what we've done and they might modify. We may say, you know, that all goes to it. But I have a hard time seeing with, we're down to 23 or 24 feet now in homes, which originally
Makes no
scheduled for
sense.
30, and it continues to erode. As, you know,
It erodes our property value, honestly.
All right, so everyone's in favor, from what I understand, of fixing that part, are we?
This is the question, you want to change it from Crown of the Road to BFE?
The BFE plus whatever the town.
Buffer.
Plus the town's determined buffer.
Right now, which is 10, you want 10 to be 0.
10 to be 0.
Correct.
So that buffer meaning
So the +2 we have.
plus
But it's not specific plus 2, it's BFE plus town's buffer equals measurement of 0.
Right, I think the point is to keep it the way, like 30 feet from like the crown of the road, like that sort of height level. We're not looking for houses to explode here, right? But like to create a measurement that remains fair as the environment changes. And the flood zone and the flood laws change where people are, you know, not spending, you know, half their disposable income on flood insurance or whatever. That's really the point that we're discussing.
So now the next question is the bonus of the 5 feet.
Yes.
So does
Wait, what was the next step with this topic?
What? No, is that, we understand this topic? BFE?
This charter talks about the use of Collins, so now they're saying.
Yeah, we need to add language to talk about the west of
Just to be
part.
clear, the current standard in the charter in the 2004 code is 30 feet above the crown of the road. We're talking only about single-family homes in that district.
Yes.
What happens to the non-single family, the multifamily?
Yeah, that's a different discussion. That's also tied in the charter to the 2004.
The crown of the road?
And how far are they allowed to go up?
I wanted.
Let Judith explain this.
Family or commercial, there's other rules that come in Florida building code rules. You can't have habitable on the first floor anyway, and that's general Florida building code rules. So there's less of an impact when you're talking about this finished floor. They have to go up a story anyway to have habitable space on anything that was going to be built new in a multifamily. Commercial, because if you're building a restaurant, you can build at grade because it's not habitable. So there's different rules there.
So you don't see an issue. The only issue this really affects is the single family, is that?
I would have to, I think that this, in general, you're not building on that level anyway, because you really have much of an impact or habitable.
So I guess the single family is pretty obvious because you see you're down to 23, 24 feet from the original 30. The question is if there's anything else in town that would be an issue, I would ask staff to come back and bring that up.
You're not starting with 30.
Let's go back to the single families, right? 2004 says 30 feet from the road. How much space that gave to those houses?
23 feet.
I have to look into that, but that's not on my list. I assume there was some regulation at that time. There probably was some minimum. If you look at homes that were built in town in the late 90s moving forward that are at a higher, I don't know what that is, but I can do some research and figure out what that was.
Okay. So now that we go back to the second topic was, does this board want to give 5 extra feet for people who do understories?
My question is why 5?
That was
what. If I may, there's an understory ordinance that was adopted. An understory is not a story. It's not habitable.
Right, understood.
So that's a different discussion.
But Joe, he wants to,
in terms of the understory, which I agree with you, 100%. Do we need to change the charter since we already have in the
He wants to give a bonus. Yes. He wants to give a bonus. Right now, the chart, remember, we're locked into 2004 height. So those homes are 30 feet. What Peter is saying that is if as a bonus for putting in an understory, we are now going to give you as a right 5 additional feet that nobody else gets unless you build an understory.
The understory doesn't count as part of the house.
Ms. Salzar, it's not.
You don't understand zoning. This is a joke.
Right. So the reason for the extra is that if you're going to build an understory, you're not going to put sand there, right? You're probably you want to go a little higher. You want to go like 8 feet or something like that. Then on top of that, like you don't have room. Like I did some plans and like the top floor is 8-foot ceilings.
Well, that's because right now you can only start. You only get 23 feet of building
Right,
space.
exactly.
So if we fix the original, you're going to get 7 more feet. So
Is that-
do you want to
is that
give a
accurate?
bonus?
So if the first part is in place, so that you're getting the extra, you're getting 30 feet above the 10 feet. The overall height of the house is gonna come up 34, 35 feet from the ground.
So you would get it at that point.
So it
And
would
then
be
that's a
more.
choice.
It's a choice.
And then it's for the
And that's the
commission
choice.
to talk about like how to, if it is important to the city to, because I do think from an environmental perspective, it is much better for me and my neighbors and everybody to have,
You could do that at the code level. You could do
Right,
that
well,
at the-
we saw-
and
yes.
then
Why don't they,
through an amendment to the existing.
this is mechanism for that.
Right.
Fine.
Great.
It's okay. So let's kill that. Let's you're going to get your feet. You'll be able to do your
If you-
story
right.
if we fix this problem.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So does the attorneys, do you guys have the direction you need for this?
No, it's not our direction. It's your direction on what this committee wants to recommend.
Rick, we want you to come back with the language and terminology so we can do a formal motion to pass it.
But so, as I mentioned earlier, the process here would be that you recommend something to us, and that we bring it back at the final report stage, and that we can vote finally on whether you want to.
I think we're clear on what we're trying to achieve.
I don't love that because then we get to the end and if we have a question or problem, we want to have something where we can go yes, 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 no, 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 yes, whatever it is. And if we wait till the end to do all that, then if there's a question or we need a little bit more time, now we have to schedule a special meeting, it has to go longer. So I would prefer that if we get through this process, you guys come back to us at the next meeting, we start out the next meeting with going through what we spoke about today. If there's questions or comments, we can send it back to you, come back to us the next meeting. So we get to the final meeting, we should only have the items from the.
We can provide you with general change, but we're not gonna draft a ballot question. That, we can't do that.
Right.
We're not gonna, we can provide you with generally what you've instructed or what you've recommended the change to. Right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Amend section 4 of the charter, first sentence to provide, to move the 2004 code standard so that the height of the house is measured not from the ground of the road, but whatever you direct,
Right.
whatever you recommend.
Not the ballot, just the part of
And
that.
I would love for the planner to come back and explain that, like, kind of like,
Before we make any decision.
like in good detail, because as much as I think I understand what's going on, I would love to see a visual.
And I think it's gonna be, right, a bunch of our neighbors are looking at us, right?
Right.
They need to understand why we're making a recommendation.
Right.
Because at the end of the day.
No, we want to
the goal is
understand it
to
clear.
Make it
Yeah.
reality,
Yeah.
right? So the clearer the better.
Right, we have that same presentation that's used, so we all on the same page.
It's easy. The direction is amend section 4 of the charter to this change that you're recommending. Whatever the
But initially
language.
we go with the town planner, right, to explain how this affects the heights.
So we're gonna get our presentation from the town planner to
Right.
go, if you're okay with that, to just kind of make it clear.
It's just one slide,
One slide, what a picture looks like now, what it will be like with the change, so it's very clear.
Are you okay with that? Because that's.
I think it's
just
assisting us to make a recommendation to the commission.
What I,
That's it, that's all we need.
We're sure telling you that next.
what I'm thinking is just bringing forth some plans that have been approved recently,
Exactly.
and I can just show you. I mean, I'm not going to draw my own. Take what has already been approved
Typical
in the
examples, yeah.
past 6 months and show them to you and show you where the measurements
Beautiful.
come.
That's all we need.
Yeah.
Existing.
That'd be wonderful.
And then we have just that clear statement, amending the charter to whatever.
Without
If
without
after
actually
reviewing the
examining the
explanation, we still want to
language, what your
proceed that way.
recommendation is and how.
Right, just something that we can all vote on together and not sit here and try to, get something. Does that make sense?
I want to, sorry, I do apologize. What I meant is that the final report will have like sample language, and then you guys come back and orders. Yes, if necessary at the end. But yes,
So I want to get the lawyer's view of it, of not the full terminology, but the basic understanding, so that we're all on the same page, you guys are on the same page. If there's a conflict, you can go back and fix it up, and then when we get to the end of the process, you'll have a whole formal oversight. Does that work?
Yes, generally, we can formulate the direction without, again, if you know the process, you have to formulate text amendments to the language, and that's very precise and involves, a lot of work, and you have to formulate a question. So we can generally summarize what your recommendation is, as was stated here today.
Exactly.
That's fine.
Amazing.
Sorry, just want to be clear that we're putting the language together, our recommendation to the commission, not writing any ballots.
No.
We're just making a recommendation. There's a couple red flags here. We see things that we want to include, not just these components, but the entire town, things like that.
Exactly. That's the goal. The goal is to go through these things, we get the plain text from them so we all understand it, we all move forward, we need to go. Because at the end of the day, it's a joint decision, nobody here makes a decision, we all vote on it together. But right now, it's so complicated that once we get the visual and we get the attorney words, hopefully everybody will
understand what we want to do, how we want to do.
And then at the end, they're gonna give us the really long stuff.
If we want to.
All right. With that being